Hello? Do I like scary movies? Well, I do host a horror show, so one would assume that I do. Favorite killer? Ooh, it's a tough one. Well, I suppose it depends on what you qualify as a slasher film. I mean, the slasher film can trace its origins back to the revenge plays of Shakespeare's time and even the Grand Guignol Theatre of the 19th century. I mean, well, take a look at Psycho, for instance. It hasn't got the high body count of other slasher films, but... Hello? Hello? Huh. Just hung up. I wonder what that one's all about. Anyway, as I was saying about slasher films. So I'm quite certain that slasher purists will balk at the idea of my calling the Abominable Dr. Phibes a slasher film. And while it does share more of its themes and tone with Grand Guignol Theatre than, say, Friday the 13th, I still think that the case can be made that it is a slasher film. If you look at the Wikipedia definition of a slasher film, and granted Wikipedia isn't the most accurate source of information in the world, it does say that a slasher film is a film where a psychotic killer stalks a group of victims and murders them in gruesome ways. Now, if you apply that to Dr. Phibes, it fits quite well. So, while Dr. Phibes may not be a true slasher film in the most pedantic sense of the word, I think that it could easily fit within the slasher genre and its related genres. So, shall we get on with the review? I think we shall.
So, we kick things off with a hooded figure playing a pipe organ while the opening credits go by and...
Hang on. I think I may have put the wrong DVD in. This looks more like The Phantom of the Opera than it does a movie about some crazy bloke killing people. Wait.
No, it's the right movie, alright, because I don't recall the Phantom ever having a clockwork jazz band. Certain stage sequels notwithstanding. Anyway, our hooded friend's lovely assistant enters the scene, and one quick costume change later, she's downstairs loading what looks like a birdcage into the car. Cut to an older gentleman getting ready to settle in for the night, whilst outside our hooded figure and his lovely assistant lower that covered birdcage into the gentleman's room. And all of a sudden, our helpless gentleman is set upon by quite a few winged mammals, bats to be precise, and is promptly nibbled to death. We then head back to our hooded friend's lair, where he and his organ...
That sounded wrong.
...sink under the floor. Cut to the next morning, when our gentleman's gentleman comes to give him his morning tea and times, and discovers the rather gruesome remains of his employer. The police are promptly summoned, and the investigation is headed up by an inspector with the rather marvellous name of Trout. One of Trout's subordinates explains that this is the second odd animal-related death in the past few weeks. Another gentleman was stung to death by bees. And that's not the only similarity between the two deaths. Both men were doctors. There may be some sort of connection, but Trout isn't so sure just yet. Next, we see a gentleman arriving at a masquerade party, where he's given a rather impressive frog mask that fits over his head. He's also a doctor, Dr. Hargreaves. Alas, for the poor doctor, his mask is a bit of a tight fit, and exit Dr. Hargreaves. Back with the police, Trout is having a bit of an argument with his superior over the case, and the superior is convinced that the deaths of the three doctors are linked, and he definitely doesn't want any word of the deaths leaked to the press. Trout tries to get his superior to see things his way, but nothing doing, and the superior leaves in a huff.
Now, there is a problem with this movie that will become more apparent as we go along. There's a lot of cutting back and forth between different scenes, which makes my job considerably more difficult. But for someone who's just watching the movie for their own enjoyment, it might be rather confusing. I'm going to skip over any digressions that don't have any direct bearing on the plot, and there are quite a few of those, but I am going to have to take some side steps here and there.
Now then, we head over to the home of Dr. Longstreet, played by the wonderful Terry Thomas. Dr. Longstreet has just gotten a package which seems to be a film can. I'm sure it's a highly scientific film about medicine. The housekeeper leaves for the night and... not about medicine then. Unless scantily clad snake charmers fall under homeopathy. Alas, there's a bit of a problem with the good doctor's projector, but he gets it fixed in time for our strange serial killer's lovely assistant, Volnavia, to appear. Yes, that is her name. Apparently, Dr. Longstreet is just that horny that he doesn't wonder how the strange lady, who he doesn't know, got into his house, let alone that she's tying him to a chair. The killer also arrives and sticks a very large needle in Dr. Longstreet's arm and starts pumping out his blood. Oh dear. During Longstreet's rather pathetic struggle, the amulet that the killer is wearing comes off and lands on the floor unnoticed. More on that later. Anyway, back to Trout and Company. Told you we'd be jumping around a bit. Sergeant Shandley comes back from his research, and he's found that all three victims worked with a Dr. Vesalius. Trout heads over to Vesalius' house and asks him if he knew the three men. He did indeed. But let's get back to the unfortunate Dr. Longstreet, who's looking a bit paler these days. Must not be getting enough sun. Outside, Volnavia is fiddling, badly mimed fiddling at that, while the killer finishes up with Longstreet and packs up his tools. Not without a parting shot at Longstreet's taste in art, be it noted. Back at Vesalius' house...
Good Lord, this jumping around is taxing.
Trout gets the news of Longstreet's death, and Vesalius knew him too, and heads over to Longstreet's house. He questions the housekeeper, who doesn't know anything, and finds the amulet. Trout takes the amulet to the jeweler who made it, and gets a bit more information. The amulet was one of a set ordered by a very fashionable lady, and the marking on it is Hebrew, so it's off to a rabbi to find out the meaning of the symbol. The rabbi says the symbol is the Hebrew word for blood. I tried to find out if it actually is, but I couldn't find any confirmation of that. Then he says that the particular symbol is part of the biblical story of the 10 plagues of Egypt.
Now, here I did find a bit more information, and my word did they mix this up. The plagues as listed in the movie are boils, bats, probably standing in for gnats, frogs, blood, rats, probably standing in for flies or possibly pestilence, hail, beasts, locusts, the death of the firstborn, and finally, darkness. Now, those of you who are up on your Old Testament will notice that flies, gnats, and pestilence did not make that list, probably for visual reasons, and the order is a bit off. But if you're looking for biblical accuracy in a campy horror film, you're probably looking in the wrong place.
In the meantime, Vesalius has been doing a bit of research. He's narrowed down all of the past cases he's worked on down to one where he worked with all of the victims so far. Back in 1921, a lady named Victoria Regina Phibes was brought in for an emergency surgery. She did not survive. To make matters a bit more complicated for Trout, there was a husband, but he died in a car crash on his way back to England. Also, there were no children, so it looks like Trout is back at square one. But the audience and the script know better because we cut back to Phibes' lair, and I'll be calling him that for the rest of the review, where he's expositing to a picture of his dead wife.
9 shall die, 9 eternities in doom.
That's good ham.
Meanwhile, out on the road, Volnavia seems to be having a bit of car trouble, and what luck! The gentlemanly Dr. Hedgepath asks his driver to give her a hand. Also, apparently the Vulcan neck pinch really does work. No. But it seems that Dr. Hedgepath is in for a rather cold night. Back at the yard, they've managed to track down 2 of the remaining doctors and nurse, but the third man, a man named Kitai, is on holiday, so they'll have to keep an eye out for him. They've also managed to track down what happened to the Phibes' estate. It seems it was transferred to a very fashionable lady who hardly speaks a word, and Trout would very much like to see her. But Trout has other things to worry about. Hedgepath's body has been discovered, frozen solid in the back of his own car.
A curse of hail in the bloody middle of nowhere.
Viserys seems to be having a bit more luck as far as clues are concerned, however. His son puts him on to a man called Darrow, who apparently knew Phibes. Darrow insists that Phibes is still alive, and Trout and Viserys head off to the Phibes family crypt to see if the good doctor and his wife are in. Turns out that they aren't. For one thing, it was the chauffeur that died in the car crash, and Victoria's body is missing from its coffin. And once more back to the yard, where the commissioner has gotten involved. And he wants answers, damn it! Sadly, I have to wait for those, because we head out to the countryside, where Dr. Kitai is getting ready for a short flight in his plane. Shanley tries to catch up to him to warn him, but the plane has a head start over the car that Shanley's driving. And here's a bit of a plot hole. How did they miss the mass of rats during the pre-flight check? At any rate, down goes Kitai in dramatic fashion, which Phibes is happy to applaud. Oh, and that car that Shanley was driving? It was the commissioner's.
Oops.
Anyway, with doctors dropping like flies, Trout has decided that it might be best for the next fellow, Dr. Whitcomb, to take a short trip to the country. Of course, he must be back in London before the end of the week for the sake of his patients. That won't be a problem, because before he can even leave his club, he's skewered by a brass unicorn head launched from a catapult across the street. Incidentally, I think this might be the funniest scene in the whole movie, provided that you find black humor amusing, of course. Well, Trout's in hot water over this latest death. Speaking of hot water, Phibes seems to be cooking up something special for his next victim, something that involves an awful lot of Brussels sprouts. Over to a hospital where the nurse, Miss Allen, is protesting about not being allowed to leave the hospital. Viserys reassures her that it's for her own safety, and when she complains about not being able to sleep with all the fuss and commotion, he advises that she take a sleeping pill. Now, Trout has the hospital surrounded, with men at every entrance, so the only way that Phibes is getting in is if he's in the hospital already. Guess what, gentle viewers? He's already in the hospital. Phibes goes to the room right above where Nurse Allen is sleeping, and after drilling a hole in the floor right above her head, he pours that green soup he was making earlier over her head. Then he lets a swarm of locusts down into the room. Meanwhile, downstairs, Trout and Viserys are discussing what Phibes' next move might be. After all, there's only 3 curses left: locusts, the death of the firstborn, and darkness. Viserys theorizes that Phibes has something special planned for him, and Trout muses that it might have something to do with the death of the firstborn. But Viserys' older brother is already dead. But Trout notes that Viserys' son isn't, and sends Shanley and Viserys to find out if the boy is all right. Of course, the boy's been taken. Back at the hospital, Trout goes to check on Nurse Allen and finds that, contrary to common sense, the locusts have stripped her bones clean and turned her hair grey. Alright. Viserys is worrying at home when he gets a call from Phibes, telling him to meet Phibes at midnight at a large house in Maldine Square. In desperation, Viserys knocks out Trout and heads to Phibes' lair, where Viserys and Phibes have a short confrontation, and Phibes reveals what he has planned for Viserys. In a gimmick that would make Jigsaw blush with admiration, Phibes has put the boy in a harness, holding a gurney in place, and placed the key to the harness inside the boy's ribcage near his heart, while over the boy's head Acid will slowly funnel down to where the boy is. Vesalius has 6 minutes to retrieve the key and free the gurney. Phibes tells Volnavia to destroy his lair, which he does with an axe to a jaunty 20 soundtrack, and Phibes himself heads downstairs. The police arrive just as Vesalius manages to get the key and free the gurney. The police chase Volnavia into the room where Vesalius is and exit Volnavia, burned by her boss's own plot. Down in the cellar, Phibes prepares to join his wife by draining his own blood and replacing it with embalming fluid, and closes up their tomb, which is equipped with a telephone for some reason. So when Trout, Shanley, and Vesalius find the cellar, Phibes is already gone. Pondering where the curse of darkness fits into this plan, Trout muses that Phibes is working on it, apparently not noticing that the top of the tomb depicts a solar eclipse that sets up the sequel quite nicely.
And there we have it, the Abominable Dr. Phibes.
I really enjoyed this movie. Despite all the jumping around, it's good campy fun with some very creative kills. Price is wonderful as Phibes, and he and Joseph Cotton, who play Vesalius, play off each other quite well. Peter Jeffrey, who plays Trout, is excellent as well, with a lot of dry British humour to make his character stand out. Actually, there's a lot of humour in this movie, even if some of it is of a very black persuasion.
This movie did have a sequel, Dr. Phibes Rises Again, but we'll get to that another time. Next time, we have the last cult theatre review for the month of October. And to be honest, this one's the worst of the lot.
Somewhere over the